to this podcast based on the teachings of the Danish writer Martinus. This particular podcast is a collaboration between the Martinus Cosmology podcast and Kosmologi podden from Sweden. I'm the host of the Martinus Cosmology podcast, and my name is Mary McGovern. And my co-host today is Micael Söderberg from Kosmologi podden in Sweden. Welcome, Micael.
Thank you, Mary. It's nice to be here.
And our guest today is Nikolaj Pilgaard Petersen, a Dane who has written, among other things, a PhD, including the works of Martinus. Welcome, Nikolaj.
Thanks. I'm very pleased to be here as well.
Nikolaj, maybe we could start with you telling us a bit about yourself. Who are you? What's your background? How did you get interested in Martinus cosmology?
Yeah, certainly. I teach mathematics and history, and I've done some and philosophy as well. And I've done some academic work, a PhD. And I also try to present some of the philosophical ideas to a broader audience. I've written a couple of books, and I've done some videos on YouTube and stuff. Yeah. And as for Martinus, I encountered him when I was in my late 20s or so, and I found his view very interesting. His worldview, world picture. Yeah. Until then, I hadn't thought that much about the bigger questions, the nature of reality, and those kind of things. I studied philosophy later, so at that point I hadn't really delved into philosophy yet. So it was a very interesting and different take on all those questions, and I started taking interest in it. Yes.
And what particular issues that Martinus took up were you interested in? Yeah,
so until then I hadn't thought too much about it. I simply assumed that science had the answers, and some people were religious, and that was fine. But now we kind of moved beyond that point. So that was a fairly a common view, I think. And then I read about some studies on near-death experiences, some of the research in that field, and I thought, well, that was very strange, because if there's something to this, then things might be entirely different than what people generally think. Right? And then I started reading more alternative stuff, and I encountered Martinus, and he had this all-encompassing worldview. Right? He has this incredible explanatory power, and it was I haven't encountered a metaphysical system or a worldview of that magnitude anywhere else in the history of philosophy. So that was very interesting. Yeah, the magnitude and the consistency of the entire world image and the explanatory power. Yeah.
But as I understand it, you encountered Martinus before you started to study philosophy.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
So that kind of kindled my interest in in philosophy in a more broad way. Yeah. So I started study. I studied history and mathematics, and I was teaching those subjects, and then I studied philosophy afterwards. Yeah. And I've tried to, in my PhD also and some other works, I tried to kind of test Martinus's views, or perhaps compare them somewhat to other philosophical views and some of the contemporary philosophical problems and stuff like that.
Did you find it helpful to have the background in Martinus' teachings when you read about different philosophical theories and like that? Did you think it was easier to understand them from that perspective, or did you have to separate them, so to speak?
Yeah, well, there are two answers to this, right? Yeah. So one view is that Martinus, he presents his metaphysics or his world picture,
yeah.
And that's one particular metaphysical system, and then there are other philosophers, they present other metaphysical systems, right? So, and then you can compare them or analyze in different ways. And the other approach is to say that, okay, Martinus, he has provided the overall framework for this. So when you read other philosophers' metaphysics, then you can kind of evaluate them against Martinus's views in a way, right? So Martinus's views, they resonate with me in a way. But I like to, as I mentioned, I like to test them more thoroughly, analytically, and more press them a bit, because his arguments or his way of grounding his views are, well, they're not perhaps on par with contemporary analytical standards, perhaps, right? So, so I did use it as an overall framework, but also as one amongst other views on the fundamental nature of reality.
Yeah.
That was a bit long-winded, but yeah.
And I can say we just had a study group here before. We are a little group about 7-8 people, and we discussed a little bit today, and we are reading an article about by Martinus, and one of the students said that Martinus says we are not supposed to believe in what he says. We have to test it in relation to our own experiences, and he, the one who said that, he come from a more materialistic background. I think he was a machine engineer, yeah, of some sort. And he said, I can't see the pure logic in this. I can't see that this is a science of some sort. If he said I should believe it, well, that's fine. But he says it is a science, and that I can't really see that. So in a way, you are trying to test that or set it in relation to the
you might say
academic philosophy.
Yeah, because it's Martinus, he says, well, I present a logical world picture, right? Yeah. And he stresses the logic part of it. And when he uses the word logic, I think it's consistent, right? So and that's a pretty big thing, because it's so all encompassing. So it's a big feat to even present a system or a model of reality that encompasses everything and is still consistent, right? So I think that is part of what he means when he says logic, because usually when you say logic, you mean it in more like a mathematical sense, right? If you have A, then follows B, perhaps with necessity. But sometimes when Martinus presents his arguments, his conclusions doesn't follow with necessity, not with logical necessity, and that's perhaps what confuses. Some is a bit confusing sometimes. Yeah. I think he uses the word logic or logik in Danish in somewhat broader sense than the specific term logic in like a mathematical sense. So.
And he has another definition of logic than any I have encountered. He says that logic is the same as love. Yeah. He says, and I quote here, being loving is the same as being truly logical and thus perfect. Yeah. Being unloving is being illogical and correspondingly imperfect. Yeah. And he interprets this saying from the Bible, blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. He interprets it as, blessed are the logical, for they conform to the world plan and therefore have no unloving or selfish kinds of thoughts, desires, or wishes that collide with it, and thus cannot experience the pain of them being crushed against the steadfastness of the world plan. So it's a rather different definition of logic than I have met before. It's the same as love. It's being in accordance with the world plan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the world plan is love. Yeah, right. So it's because everything fits together perfectly, and it's that kind of logic. It's how everything works perfectly. And if you understand that, then you are a living being. So these two things are. So in a way, your ethical, I don't know, level, perhaps a moral level. You have to reach a certain altruistic stage before you can even accept this kind of logic, you might say.
Right.
Yeah. So it's in that sense, it's very different. You can't just deduce it rationally.
No, it's not a sort of cold logic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's not cold logic. It's very much connected with a warm heart.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. The warm heart is a
prerequisite.
Prerequisite.
Yeah.
For even accepting his arguments and conclusions, I think. His premises.
And usually they don't work like that in the academic field, I think.
Exactly.
So they probably would think that this is some kind of religion or modern religion of some sort.
They would. When I first was doing some of the academic work, and I did a bigger thesis, and I presented it, and then the professor he saw the name Martinus, and then he said, "Oh, no." Well, he didn't say it, but afterwards he said, "Hey, when you came in and I saw that name, I thought, oh no, it's going to happen that." And then he said, "All right," then it was okay after all. But just the name. Afterwards, he said, "Oh, I didn't know there was so much philosophy in Martinus's work, right?" So the general perception is that is some kind of perhaps New Age religious stuff, I think.
But it's interesting that he said that, because it's true that Martinus, he talks about reality, he talks about knowledge, and he talks about free will, and I suppose that's some topics that relates to traditional philosophy as well.
Yeah, that's traditional philosophy. Because most of the, I don't know, more mainstream contemporary philosophy is much more technical in nature, and it's within a materialistic framework, that the assumption simply is that what exists fundamentally is the physical, and that's it pretty much. So there's been, in recent years, things have begun to perhaps open a little bit up, but the overall assumption is that it's this is far. You can't really take it seriously, I think, for perhaps for a big part of the academic world. That's the case.
But your thesis was very well received, wasn't it?
Yes, they found it interesting, and I think they like that something new is happening and new perspectives and that. So in principle, that's a good thing. Everyone agrees on that. In practice, I think they found it interesting, but I also think that many said, "Yeah, that's fine. Interesting, but it's a bit too far out." Yeah.
Okay.
But there have been steering. So there have been some movement toward a broader approach to the questions. Yeah. So the question of the fundamental nature of reality, that's traditionally a key philosophical question. But in contemporary philosophy, it's not present very.
It's not in the forefront.
No, it's not in the forefront. No, because it's assumed that the material world is the fundamental.
We have one life. and it ends when we die.
Yes. So because even questioning that brings you much perhaps too close to religious points of view. If you want to do an academic career, you have to you have to watch your steps in that regard, I think.
And isn't there a lot of research into near-death experiences and the whole concept of reincarnation? Isn't it the University of Virginia in America?
Yeah. There are some places,
pockets,
but I think in the general, within the mainstream framework, people think that they're a bit crazy, right? All right, they just do their things and that's fine. Yeah. But they do serious research.
They do serious research.
They do and publish papers and stuff. Yeah. But it's not within mainstream.
No, and I guess it's very hard to get funding for that kind of research.
Yeah. When I did my PhD, I just did it by myself. But otherwise, you have to receive a grant, and so you have to present your project, and that project has to it has to be of interest to those providing the grants. So it has to have some utility typically, or you have to do applied philosophy, or how do we handle global warming, something like that, right?
Okay, that's also a philosophical question.
Yeah, you could do. There's some moral questions. There's some different ways. So you have this applied philosophy or kind of practical philosophy in a way. These are the more theoretical questions, the traditional questions, and they are not they're not on the forefront at the moment now.
Is it possible to research about how can mankind create peace? Is that a sort of philosophical question?
I think that would be much easier to get grants. Okay. But not perhaps world peace, but how do we because these are concrete problems that we need to handle, right? Yeah. And that's what people want to spend their money on.
Yeah. It's understandable, perhaps. I was thinking that the more historical philosophers like Plato and others, did they believe in a more reincarnation and another kind of reality, or were they also materialistic in their worldview?
No. Materialism is historically it's a fairly new position. So it perhaps in the 19th century it kind of got traction with the rise of the natural sciences, and starting a bit earlier, but the ability to explain the natural phenomena naturally.
Without the religious
without religious, but also specifically by observing the behavior of the material world. So the laws of nature. So this is a materialistic understanding of reality, and this increased ability to explain more and more, it has led to perhaps the conclusion, perhaps that then we can explain everything from the way the physical world not behaves, but functions or works. So
they were impressed by the natural sciences, and
they were impressed. But the natural sciences they did explain a lot, and there were huge benefits from this. But if you go further back, in the 17th century, Descartes, for example, he had the idea of dualism, that the human being possesses a body and a soul, right? And that's a more traditional understanding. And there's also the concept of idealism, that the physical world is what we experience as physical objects are not existing in themselves. We experience them. Perhaps it's something else that appears to us, and Martinus would probably say that, in a specific way, but it's not, the physical world is not the fundamental, it's not what is fundamental in reality. And
that's a kind of acceptable view in some fields of philosophy. or
there are proponents today, but it's a very so there are few of them, because it's when you claim that this table doesn't really exist, it's a bit against common sense, right?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people would agree that the table does not exist plainly as we experience it. It's made up of atoms. It's made up of atoms, right? And there are, in between the atoms, there's just vacuum. So it's almost simply nothing, but we experience it as matter that we can kind of feel and touch, but in reality, I don't know. But yeah, contemporary physics would say that matter doesn't really exist, right? We just perceive it as a substantial, solid, as solid. Yeah.
And Martinus says that nothing is as it appears to be.
Yeah.
So you could look at this table from many perspectives. At the moment, we see this table is supporting our microphones and so on, so it has a certain physicality. But if we looked into the microcosmos that is made up, it's particles in empty space, and most of it's empty space.
Yes. And I think that contemporary science would agree completely on this.
Yeah,
I would agree.
Yeah.
So, but you asked about Plato as well, and at least if interpreting him, as has been done traditionally, he believes in reincarnation. Yeah. So it's a matter of interpretation, but he believes that the human being has a soul, and that there'll be another life after this one. So according to him, life is not about getting rich or even married. It's about achieving knowledge and insights and become a better person.
it's like Martinus.
It has a lot of similarities, like Martinus. Yeah, he has the cave parable.
The parables. A parable of the cave.
Where
you described it in your lecture you had here for 1 year ago. I think you had a picture of the people in the cave, and when they
maybe you could explain that for those who don't understand.
Yeah, okay, so there are some people in a cave, and they are chained in the cave, and they've been chained in that way for their entire life. So they've never seen anything than the back wall, perhaps, or the back of the cave. And then behind there's a fire, a bonfire or something. And then there are some other people with figures, and the fire makes those figures casting shadows on the wall in the cave. So the chained people, the only thing they can see are the shadows of the signs or figures behind them. So when they see a shadow of a figure of a tree, they say, "Oh, there's a tree," for example. And they never experienced anything else than this. That's their entire world of experience. And then one day, one of these people, he escapes the chains and he climbs out of the cave. And then he when his eyes have adjusted to the light, he sees a real tree, and he said, "Oh, this is fantastic. It has color, and it's, I don't know, 3D dimension or whatever." And he can even see the sun, and he can see the real world. And then he climbs down to his friends and say, "Oh, this is not the true reality. You think this is the tree? This is just a shadow." And they say to him, "What? You're crazy. Everybody knows that this is a tree, right?"
Okay.
So Platon, he tells this parable. So we are the ones in the cave, right? We think that what we experience with our senses is the deepest or the true reality, but it's just shadows. It's just poor replications or images of a more fundamental or true or and perhaps good reality in a sense. And so the cave, it doesn't exist in a physical sense, but it's climbing out of the cave is an intellectual journey, or a journey of insight or on knowledge. It's understanding reality in a deeper sense. And that's the way to get out of the cave. Mathematics, you would say, is one step, and philosophy, and then it's also a matter of interpretation, how you get all the way out of the cave. Perhaps mysticism. So if he is interpreted within the framework of Martinus's thoughts, then it pretty much aligns with Martinus, much of his stuff.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So if Martinus's world picture is the premise, then you could easily argue that Plato he had, he was pretty
ahead of his time.
Ahead of his time, and perhaps even ahead of today's time as well. Yeah. Ahead of materialism.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we don't see him as a religious theorist or something. Plato, he is a philosopher.
Yeah, it is. But I think today, a lot of people working on his, analyzing his works, but not a lot of academic philosophers take his thoughts serious in the sense that they think that he actually describes reality as it is. Right?
Yeah.
So you could do historical research and interpretations, but I don't think he had. I don't think people today really believe that he presents reality as it truly is.
So does his work have any impact on the personal lives of the researchers?
Plato's?
Yeah.
I think perhaps 100 years ago or 150 years ago. So there were people were much more open to the idea of idealism, the idea that reality is not just the physical stuff that we think it is. So about 100 years ago, or perhaps around the year 1900 or something, then materialism really kind of everybody became materialists almost. So the ideas of idealism, and they were like pushed aside. But I think before that, I think some of them who studied Plato, they thought he has something to offer. No, he's got something here. And I think that's a good chance that he has actually. Yeah.
Well, Mary, should we talk a little bit about consciousness, or what do you think?
Yes. You have talked previously about what you have called the easy problem of consciousness and the hard problem of consciousness.
Yeah.
And
well, it's not my terms, but it's...
They're not your terms? No, okay.
Philosophy called terms. Yeah.
I understand the easy problem of consciousness is connected with the brain. The brain has certain functions and so on. And I remember hearing you asking the question, is the brain necessary?
Yeah.
And I myself have worked with a teenage boy who had almost no brain. He only had a few brain cells just under the skull. The rest was full of body fluid.
Yeah.
But he worked as my interpreter when I was working in Germany. So he was totally fluent in English and German. He had there was no lack of intellectual ability. There were some problems with growth and coordination, but intellectually he was absolutely fine. So I wondered, what's the brain for if we can have a normal life with so little brain?
Yeah. That it is extraordinary, yeah. And I think a paper was written in the 80s with a title along those lines: "Is our brain even necessary?" Something like that. And that was based on studies on people,
with this water on the brain.
Yeah, and it has some
hydroencephalite.
Yeah, there's some
something.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And even people were lacking, I think, perhaps 95% of the brain mass. They were functioning pretty well. It was very interesting.
Yes.
But the part where conscious is assumed to be located, that's the kind of the outer part of the brain. And I think most of the missing brain mass or cells. It was from other parts of the brain, but still, perhaps 90% or whatever of the brain was missing. And one of the people mentioned in the study, I think he was a math student or something. I think he studied mathematics at university, and he had a very high IQ. So that was quite
extraordinary.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I visited a whole department at the hospital in Germany where they had all these children and teenagers with this illness, which left them with very little brain. But they function normally. As I said, they had some coordination difficulties, but it was partly due to this very enlarged head. And balancing a very large head on a normal body, that was a problem, and that's what I was there to help them with. But
so because of the water, their heads, they grew.
Their heads expanded and expanded until one of the fathers of one of the patients invented a shunt that could drain away the excess fluid, so you could stop this degeneration of the brain. But there was no degeneration of intellectual functions.
And that seems difficult to explain within a materialistic framework.
Yeah, because a lot of work has been done in mapping what parts of the brain are associated with various activities, and that is also true. So how does it work? So the soft problems, I think. The easy problems of consciousness. That's mapping the brain. So which part of the brain do which have which functions? So that would be termed the easy problems, because that could be done empirically. You can just test the brain, and if something happens here, then this happens in your world of experience.
You can measure it.
You can measure it. So you can find correlations there. So, but the hard problem is why do consciousness even exist at all? So according to the materialist point of view, what exists fundamentally is the physical, is the brain, and the brain somehow, generates or produces or results in experience existing.
Some kind of epiphenomenon or something.
But how does something unconscious, like the physical world, how can it generate, or how can it make consciousness come into existence? So that's a very big leap. So mental phenomena and physical phenomena, those are the two they're so different. We don't know anything that's further apart from each other than these two phenomena. And still here the claim is that one of them can kind of create the other or make the other come into existence. So if there's nothing conscious in the physical world, how can our brain create consciousness? So why do we even experience? Why are we not just like robots? Because everything happens in the brain anyway. We have all these impulses and chemical reactions, and it governs our body and everything. It happens according to the materialist point of view. We have everything in our brain. So why experience? Why this epiphenomenon, right? That's at least one way of approaching it. Because we can't affect what happens in the brain anyway. So usually if you have a physical effect, you need a physical cause. Things don't happen without any causes. So what happens in our brain happens because of previous physical causes. So we can't, something happening within my conscious, a thought, it can't affect anything within my brain, according to a materialist interpretation of reality. How should that be possible? Because it's not physical. So you cannot affect physical stuff except by by physical stuff. I don't know if that makes sense. But.
Yeah. So does materialistic science say that thoughts are immaterial?
So it depends on what you mean by the term thoughts, right? So if you're a neuroscientist, perhaps you would equate the two and say, well, a thought is simply this brain process. That's simply what a thought is. Right? So that would be explaining in terms of if you only look at the physical world, then would you say that's a thought. But the problem is the experience of the thought, experiencing it. Usually consciousness is, I don't know if it's defined, but it's described as I'm conscious because there's something it is like to be me, and there's something it is like to be you, and therefore you're conscious. But presumably there's nothing it's like to be this table, so this table is not conscious. And it's, I don't know, it's a bit, I don't know, windy perhaps, but why is there something it is like to be me? Why do I even experience anything? Because the atoms in my brain they're not different from the atoms, I don't know, in water or coal or in an apple or whatever. But still, I'm able to experience. I have this feeling of being a center of the experience of subjectivity. So
experiencing joy or sorrow or
but even more fundamentally, experiencing at all, even that I'm experiencing, instead of it's just all being the laws of nature just happening. Because there are no reasons really that we should experience anything. Because according to a materialist point of view, because what exists is the physical world, and it just it works like a clockwork. It just happens. The laws of nature just works.
Actually, I have a theory that you could say that Martinus' entire work is based on the theme of the experience of life. Like the first section in livsupplevelsen is, if I summarize it, he says that every living being is subject to the experience of life. That's the first sentence in his work. And for me, the whole of livsupplevelsen, the book of life, all 3,000 pages, is explaining this experience of life. What is the experience of life? And he has this 3-part model of the living being with this eternal I, an eternal ability to create an experience, an internally changing organism and consciousness. So that's another model than the scientific or philosophical model.
Yeah, it is. And that's when I did my PhD and some other work, that's I don't know, borrowed some of those ideas, specifically, because that would be an entirely different way of approaching the problem. Because the problem of consciousness, or the hard problem of consciousness, it's present because of the premise of materialism. So if the premise is that what exists is the physical, and then we have to explain consciousness, then we encounter this problem.
Yeah.
But if we turn it around and say, what exists is experience, that's the most fundamental thing. Okay, then we experience this table as if it it seems to us that the table has independent existence, but that's just an experience of the table. So that would be a more realistic approach. And that would match Martinus's approach, I think, because he would say, well, the table is simply the appearance of something. There's something below, or there's something behind it that appears to us as the table. And what is it then that appears to us at the table? That's a big question, right? Because the problem is then that if we kind of dismiss our empirical, that we can engage the world empirically, or that we can reach the world empirically, then we have a problem, right? So the natural scientists, they would say, all right, we have our empirical method, and because of that, we can gain knowledge about the world, about reality. But now we say, no, you cannot. You only have the experience of the table, but in reality, it's something else. Well, then we have a problem, because and that's Kant's, Immanuel Kant, German philosopher. He would say, yeah, that's how it is. Das Ding an sich, he would say, the thing in itself, we can never know it, he would say. Okay. We can only know how it appears. Yeah. And that matches Martinus somewhat. Martinus, he would say, yeah, but we can know something about the thing in itself, right? Yeah. We can't really describe it. That's why he uses X. At least we can't describe it in detail, but we can say something. And we can say a lot about the appearances of
the processes of manifestation.
Yeah. Right. So the content of our world of experience, it follows certain patterns, and that kind of rules, or it's a big system. And that's, in the end, that's what perhaps is of interest, isn't it? Because our experience is our world.
Yeah. And I think central to our experience of life is our senses, or what Martinus calls our set of senses. And he describes senses, or our ability to sense, as something that evolves. So that at the moment I see this table as something solid. And theoretically I can understand, well, it's particles in empty space, and I know it's from a tree and so on. But with cosmic senses, I would see the world entirely differently. So our perception of the world is very much governed by the senses we have at a particular stage in evolution. So a plant might experience life differently to a lion, and a lion will experience it differently to a human being. And human beings at different levels of evolution will experience life differently.
Well, that's a good point. And the concept that consciousness has to do with something it is like to be me, for example. That idea was presented in a paper called "What's It Like to Be a Bat?" Actually, a bat. So one of the points was that we can't imagine how it must be to be a bat, because it can't really see like we do. It has, I don't know, sonar, some stuff, some science, sound, some way of navigating using sound, right? So it's the experience of the world must be entirely different from ours, and we can't even imagine how it must be. But still, there's a way it is like to be a bat. So it is conscious. So that would fit that point pretty well. Mm-hmm. And then, as in traditionally, there are two ways of achieving knowledge. There's empirical knowledge, like the sciences. We use our senses, we can see and we can measure things. And then there's the rational approach. We can think like the logic. So we can attempt to gain insights by thinking. So traditionally, these are the two only ways of achieving knowledge. So empirically or rationally. But then Martinus says, well, there's a third way. Right? There's intuition. And he will say only when the ability to achieve knowledge through intuition is sufficiently, developed, or you need to reach a certain level before you can even accept my concepts or my ideas. Mm-hmm. And it has to do with this third kind of gaining knowledge of
a third way of getting. Kenneth is one of those really difficult
insight.
So I think that has
cognition is a technical term, but it's not commonly used.
In philosophy, you call it epistemology. Mm. So usually there are two ways here.
To gain knowledge. That
would be a thing. And I think that's one of the big problems when you talk about Martinus in contemporary academic philosophy, because the other two ways are, accepted, of course. And then if you say, but there's a third way, right? And then you just know the truth. Then people will say, that sounds a bit, and you can only know the truth when you reach a certain level. So if you don't accept my arguments, then it's just because, you haven't reached that level.
It's a sort of premise.
The premise, yes.
You have to believe there is a third way, like intuition. If you don't, well, everything falls apart.
Yeah,
But if you have developed intuition, couldn't you say that's also empirical knowledge, but it's from the point of view of another set of senses?
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
But the problem is that usually when we talk about empirical knowledge, we'll say, okay, there's a table here. I can see the table, and you can see the table, and you can see the table. So we can agree that there's a table, at least we perceive it as a table. But if I say, now I've experienced this, and I know it's true.
Okay.
Well, you haven't experienced it. So how can you know that it's true? I can just tell you that I know it's true, but you don't have the sense of truthfulness, or you can be certain it's true. You can't validate it.
No, I can't take it in any way. No.
And Martinus, he will say, yeah, that's exactly how it is. Only when you reach, when you get far enough, then you'll, by experience it yourself, you will see, or not even see, but you will know that this is the truth. But until then you, at some point you could perhaps accept some theoretical stuff, but to even before reaching you at that point, then we just dismiss it. And that's not how the academic world works. Then you have to present your arguments. And in principle, if the argument is strong enough, everybody would buy it. I agree to it.
You talked about earlier on, I think, about these research about near-death experiences or the like, where they can see where heart patients have been unconscious and they can talk about things they have seen under their operation. And are these results sort of influencing the ordinary science or the philosophy, or is it just a very special branch within the science field? Or can we use that for some evidence of a consciousness, do you think?
Yeah, I think we can, but there's still it's still not integrated in mainstream academic research. But there has been done serious research, and specifically on this, as it was called the AWARE study, and I think it was published in 2015 in a paper, and they continued it, and I think they'll be publishing the next batch of results soon, or have perhaps just published. And they're doing very serious work on this. But their approach is not what is the nature of reality. Their approach is it's within a medical framework. So they say, how do we treat patients here? So when patients have cardiac arrest and we resurrect them, well, what to do then? Because it looks like, according to their research, people are experiencing something, and in few cases it seems like that experiences can be verified objectively, that they are actually, or at least in one case, actually experiencing things while their brain is not functioning. And that's pretty interesting. So it has gained interest, and this particular research result is very interesting because within a materialist framework, you would say, well, it's the brain that generates or creates consciousness and experience. So if the brain doesn't work, then experience is impossible. But it seems like we have a case here where there's no brain activity, at least in parts of the brain that is assumed to generate consciousness. But at the same time, you can determine the point in time there are verifiable experiences, and that's very interesting. But it's only one single case, right? So they continued their studies, and I think the second batch of results, they are a bit less clear on this subject, but we'll wait and we'll have to see. So, okay, So it is very interesting, but it's still it conflicts with the paradigm or the basic assumption of materialism, and
it needs many more cases before you can even think about revidera, what's it called? Revising your paradigm.
Yes, I think. But I think there's, as I mentioned, there is an opening. There's people are also within the academic world are more open now than they were 20 years ago. I think. But these results like that we just talked about, and they would be very useful if you want to broaden the perspective on the question of the nature of reality. Yeah.
Mm.
And of course, they probably they try to explain it away in.
Yeah, actually, in the paper they are. Well, you can't say, "Hey, look, we have found now materialism is just but they just say it's perplexing. They use the term perplexing.
Yeah.
So they even have one sentence and they say, within the common, I don't remember the exact wording, but within the framework of the common assumptions, this is perplexing. But that's a pretty big thing. But it means, we
don't understand.
We can't really explain this, and perhaps our assumptions are even wrong. So, but that's as far as you can go, because they want the paper to be published, and even to include an example like that is somewhat controversial.
Mm. But there were many examples of that kind of thing in Bruce Greyson's book, After. Yeah. Many well-documented examples.
Yes. But the difference here is that usually in this kind of research, it's retrospective. So you talk to people that had an experience, but at least ideally, when you do science, you say, all right, I want to test this hypothesis, so I do this experiment, and then I'll see if the results match or not. So you have to set up the experiment beforehand, and then you get the results, and then you can validate or falsify or verify. So methodically, this study here is better because you get the result in a controlled environment and as a part of a study, as opposed to talking to people who had an experience at some point. So it's not to say that Grayson is wrong, it's just to say that methodically...
it's questionable from a method.
Yeah, within that, I think...
Traditionally,
a lot of criticism.
But it must be very hard to do controlled trials with near-death experiences, because you'd have to attempt to kill people.
Yeah. Exactly. That's the problem.
So that's a big problem.
Yeah, and I think they were asking, and perhaps it was like 15 hospitals or something over several years, perhaps 4 years. I don't recall the exact numbers, but there were thousands of patients that had cardiac arrest and that were resurrected.
Resuscitated.
Yeah. And there was only one case, because a lot of them, they died perhaps, or they were in such a poor condition that they couldn't really talk to them and do the interviews and stuff. And some people perhaps didn't want to talk about it. So there was only one case that could be verified out of thousands of resuscitation.
But Pim van Lommel, the Dutch cardiologist, has done a lot of research. He's written a book, Beyond Consciousness, isn't that what it's called?
I think so. I'm not sure.
Where he was so fascinated by the stories his patients told him, the ones he had resuscitated, that so many of them came back with these stories of experiencing life when they were technically dead. So he began to write the stories down and then do research into it.
And he made the first the breakthrough paper. It was published in a serious scientific journal. I forgot the name of it, but that's right. And he made a big study, a Dutch study. Yeah. I talked to him once, and he said actually about the aware study paper that we just talked about. They were not at first. They were not going to include the case because it was just a single case, and usually it's not enough if you only have one case. But then they said, "Hey, include it anyway because this is so interesting." And then they did, and then it got published. And it is a very interesting case because it contradicts it straight out contradicts materialism. It seems at least.
So in the future, it will appear, I suppose, some sort of hard facts that we can rely on.
But that's what is needed, I think. So more of those kind of studies. But at least now, these are big studies, several years and many hospitals and thousands of patients. So if they can get the funds for it, the funding, I think it will continue in that direction. So, and that research was what triggered my interest in all this stuff. So I think it's very fascinating.
So perhaps I could ask if studying Martinus has changed your view of consciousness. How do you view consciousness after studying Martinus's works?
Yeah, so there's the, what would you say, I don't know, theoretical view, or how I view things from a more theoretical perspective, perhaps, but then also the personal perspective. And I'm not sure that I'm convinced by his theoretical arguments 100%, but as I said, his thoughts just resonate with me in a way. So if I were to make my best, how would you say, best bet, or what I think is the most likely description of the nature of reality, I'll probably point to Martinus, right? So it's the best model I've seen, and personally, it appears true to me, but I still need a bit. It has some weaknesses if you try to test this real. If you kind of test it
and tap,
we'll say phrasing like that. But if you kind of push it, there are some weaknesses in his arguments, but it feels true. That's just a personal.
Yeah,
you can't use that as in a paper, of course, right? But so I try to live my life as much as I can according with this. But basically what he says is, be a good person, right? And then you will find that many places. So I think it has some merit to it.
And you believe in reincarnation? You find it probable.
My students, they ask me sometimes, because sometimes I talk to them about some of this stuff, and they say, "Oh, what do you believe in?" And I say, "I don't want to believe."
You are a scientist.
I think
it could be possible.
It's more likely that reincarnation is true than it is not, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. So when they ask me, "Do you believe in life after death?" I say, "Well, I don't know, but perhaps 80%.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's pretty much.
I think it has a lot more substance than people usually assume.
Yeah.
And I think this is there are substantive arguments supporting this, and there are much stronger arguments than what is, or perhaps the arguments supporting the opposite views, the views of materialism, are not as strong as people assume. So the view of materialism is much less well grounded than what is usually assumed. So I would, my best, not suggestion, evaluation, but I think that Martinus's world picture is the best. How would you say in English, the best bit?
The best bit.
Best bet.
Yeah, the best bet.
But bet is more like gambling. So,
but
the best hypothesis.
yeah,
and I think so. Yeah, but on an existential level, I find this very satisfying. And so I've kind of I'm not accepted it, but I really like it, and I try to live as if it
isn't.
No, I think that's a great way of thinking.
I think one argument Martinus comes with that I like very much was the argument for eternal life, and that is that the experience of life depends on contrast. That you can't experience anything unless it forms a contrast with what you experienced before. And if you accept that, then that could never have been a first experience. So therefore life is eternal. So I find eternal life a rather easy thing to accept. The mechanics of it, birth, rebirth, death, rebirth, and so on, that's another step. But I find I'm totally convinced about eternal life because I actually experienced something. And I couldn't experience it if there wasn't an experience before. And there had to be an experience before that, and before that, and before that. So there could never have been a first experience. That blew me. That made so much sense to me. So I became totally convinced that I was an eternal being.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Because usually when we talk about contrast, it's if I have a single experience, that I can see this color, that color, and I can't to even be able to perceive a specific color. That requires that there are different colors, right? So there has to be contrast within the single image I experience. But yeah, it's an interesting argument that it also happens across time, that you have to have a contrast. A previous experience have to contrast the experience you are having at the moment.
You can think about that one.
Yeah, I've heard it before. Oh yeah, it is interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Mary, time flies when you're
Time is flying when you're having fun, yes. So, Nikolaj, do you have any future plans for research or teaching or working more with these ideas? Or what?
I have a full-time job teaching, so my kids are there 4 and 8, so I'm getting a bit more spare time, but I don't have that much time. And I'm doing YouTube videos. I've started it, I don't know, half a year ago or something, perhaps a bit more, on an English language channel, would you say? But
yeah.
A channel with videos and scripted videos. So they have been more they were a bit more smooth than today.
Yeah.
And it takes some time because I have to do the scripts and all this stuff. And then I am writing. I've been asked to write some chapters to a book, and I plan to do perhaps more lectures in the future or something. So it's not academic work, just at the moment.
Good. Yes. So thank you very much, Nikolaj, for taking all the time to come from Jutland to Klint to take part in this podcast.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Micael, for joining us from Stockholm.
Yeah, well, I was here anyway. So.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.